Well, I was sharing a story the other day with someone about Pastor David Russell, who was talking about a little precocious 3-year-old that was in his congregation. His parents brought him to church and were trying to teach him what it's like to be in church. When to be quiet, when to speak, when to sing, when to pray, and what's going on. So one Sunday, they gave Nathan a $1 bill. And he was told that he was to place it in the offering plate when it came around. Well, the plate moved down the aisle, and his parents held it in front of him, but Nathan held on to his $1. Finally, his mother gently took the $1 from him and placed it in the plate, and the plate moved down the pew, and suddenly the quiet doxology was broken by the words, "I want my $1 back! I want my $1 back!" You see, in Nathan's eyes, he had been robbed, and he wanted everyone to know it. And so as the parents tried to quiet their son, he just kept being insistent, "I want my $1 back!" Everybody in the congregation was fighting a losing battle with their laughter. And through the remaining strains of the accompanies trying to provide a worshipful, meditative time of offertory, all you could hear was, "I want my $1 back!" Eventually, Nathan's parents gave him another $1 to hold, and that quieted him down enough so that people could sing the doxology. But Pastor Russell knew that he could not ignore that he would have to address it when he got into the pulpit. And so standing in the pulpit and seeing everyone's smiling faces, he said, "You know, we really shouldn't laugh. It may be that Nathan's only voicing the feelings that some of us have about giving to God. We do so not sometimes joyously, but out of a sense of obligation. We do so sometimes unwillingly. We may not say it, but many of us might be thinking, 'I want my $1 back.'" Well, today's text from 2 Corinthians is about giving. Paul is writing to the people, and the Corinthian church was a rather wealthy church. They were well off, and many of the churches that Paul was starting with were just struggling churches that had not enough to even keep going, much less to start. And so he was trying to encourage the Corinthians to share what they had for the glory of God. Now, you know by now that I'm not a pastor that likes to dwell on the subject of money. I heard about one rural pastor who used a different approach. One Sunday he got in the pulpit and he announced, "Now before we pass the collection plate today, I'd like to request that the person that stole the chickens from Farmer Jones's hen house please refrain from giving anything today. The Lord doesn't want money from a thief." The pastor sat down and just looked out to the congregation, and for the first time ever, he noticed that every single person in the congregation gave. Now that approach might work, but stealing chickens is not really a problem around here unless maybe you're at Mary Lou's house. But like I said to the kids, there are so many different ways to give. You know, the Bible tells us that we should tithe. Tithing is starting at 10% of what we have received from the Lord. But tithing doesn't just mean our money. If you're not able to give of your money, tithe 10% of your time. We have plenty of things going on in this church, and we need plenty of help with different things. Tithing your time, beginning at 10%. is a way to start and to honor God and to give back. We have a lot of talents in this church, a lot of untapped talents. You are all sitting there. I guarantee you everyone is sitting there with some untapped talent that you all have. And we're just blessed if one happens to come out. And sometimes they come out by accident. Sometimes we kind of fall on somebody's gift. And then all of a sudden they share it and it blossoms. So perhaps you share your talents. and perhaps you share your gifts. It's been a tough year. Many people have lost jobs, their home values have declined, savings are drained. It becomes hard. And in our society, money ebbs and flows. Times go up and times go down. Losing funds sets aside for retirement, watching our home equity sometimes drain away, losing our jobs, our source of income, that puts all sorts of stress on us. And yet we know that to do God's glory, to do God's work, we have to have a budget. Just like you can't run your household without knowing how much money you're going to have to pay your light bills and to pay your heat bills, we're in the same condition. We have to plan, and we have to know that. Churches are dying all over the place now. Our church is thriving. We're so blessed in so many ways. And we have to continue those blessings by showing our love for God and for God's work, by giving the best of our time and our talents. I was thinking about people who have a love of money and hoard it, and I came across an illustration about a wrestler in the 1890s, a Turkish wrestler, professional wrestler, and his name was Yusuf, and he competed in Europe and in the United States under the name of the Terrible Turk. Some of you may have even read about him. Well, the Terrible Turk was so in love with money that he insisted that when he did a wrestling match, that he be paid in gold. He didn't want money, he wanted pure gold. And so he was coming back from Turkey on a ship, carrying all the gold that he had won. And on the second day at sea, the ship ran into trouble, and a storm came up and he started to sink. And he jumped into the sea and to get into a lifeboat, but the weight of the gold in his belt caused him to sink. It was estimated to be worth between $8,000 and $10,000, and it pulled him down, and he drowned. To have money and lose it, or to become so obsessed with it that it costs your life or your soul, is just as bad as having none at all. So Paul writes to the church at Corinth and says, you people are blessed. You have money to give. You have time to give. You have talents to give. Share it with those that are hurting. Share the wealth, he writes. Since you excel in everything, especially in your faith, you have to share it. Now, you would think that this message of equality would be one that would be acceptable, especially in the church. After all, when the church first began, the members had held everything in common. Well, you would be wrong, because the church people were afraid. They were afraid that they wouldn't have enough. They were afraid that they wouldn't have enough for themselves. What if they didn't have enough and they'd shared everything they had? And Paul is trying to explain to them, what does that say about your faith in God? If you question, if I give a little bit more to the church and I don't have enough for myself, what are you saying about your trust in God? That God will provide your daily bread. And Paul's saying that's what this church was built on. It was built on the fact that we share what we have and we give for all. He says Christ gave us the gift of salvation, and we have to share with others. Giving is our way of recognizing the proper place of money in our lives. Everything we own, everything we have, is a gift from God. As we come into this time of Thanksgiving, it's important that we remember with Thanksgiving all the blessings that we have. And to remember that but for God, we would have nothing. We serve God, not mammon. Found another wonderful story about two college girls who were renting a house. And one day an old man appeared at their back door with glassy eyes and a furrowed face and a lot of stubble. And they just assumed that he was a drunk. And he came bearing a bag of produce, and he wanted to sell some. So they were a little bit scared and nervous, so they quickly bought some produce from him, thinking that would get rid of him. But then the next day, he came back. And to their chagrin, he introduced himself, and he said that his name was Mr. Roth, and he lived down the street in a little shack that they'd seen when they drove by. As they got closer to him, they realized that his eyes were glassy because he had cataracts, not because he was a drunk. And on subsequent days, he would shuffle in and he was wearing 2 mismatched right shoes. And he would share his philosophy about life. And on one visit, he exclaimed, "The Lord is so good. I came out of my shack this morning and I found a bag full of shoes and clothing on my porch." The girls said, "That's wonderful, Mr. Roth. We're so happy for you." And he said, "You know what's even more wonderful? I was going down the street and I found a family that needed those shoes and that bag of clothing." No wonder that man was so happy. He owned his material goods. They didn't own him. The Bible doesn't say that money is the root of evil. It says that the love of money is the root of all evil. There are some things that only money can do. Put food on our table, put heat in our homes, put clothes on our backs. But there are some things that money can't do. It can't buy happiness. It can't buy fulfillment. It can't buy salvation. Our response is to give back to God in gratitude for what God has given us. I know that there are some people who question why we do all of this mission work, especially in Guatemala. They think, why do you do that? There's things to be done home. In this area. Well, you know what? Look around. We do a lot in this area. We are known as the church that does stuff. But I can tell you that when we go to Guatemala, we meet people who truly understand what stewardship is. Many of those people do not know if they will have enough food to eat that night to fill their stomachs or the stomachs of their children. And yet they will give the food they have to share with someone else. And they will give it in joy. And when you go into a church there and you start to pray, there's a cacophony of voices all praying out loud and thanking God. All you hear is gracias de Dios por, and it just goes on and on. For this day, for my children, for waking up, for the sun, for the trees, for the beauty, for the food that we, and it will go on, and you can't stop them. They understand that it is in giving that we receive. And what we receive is joy. One last story. Frances Ridley Havergill was a young, chronically ill English woman whose father was an Anglican pastor. And she didn't have a lot of gifts that she thought, but one day she decided, you know, I have a lot of jewelry. She was fairly well off. And so she packed up all her jewelry and she sent it to a church mission society, and she told them to dispose of it and use it for whatever they needed for their work. She told her friend, she said, I had no idea I had that many pieces of jewelry, 50 pieces of jewelry. Her desire was simple. She wanted to give back to God. Now we remember her not for her gift of jewelry to the Church Mission Society. We remember her for the beautiful words that she wrote. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my moments and my days. Let them flow in ceaseless praise. Take my feet and let them move at the impulse of thy love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Take my voice and let me sing, always, only for my King. Take my lips and let them be filled with messages from thee. Take my silver and my gold, not a mite would I withhold. Take my intellect and use every power as thou shalt choose. Take my will and make it thine. It shall no longer be mine. Take my heart It is thine own. It shall be a royal throne. Take my love, my Lord, I pour. At thy feet, thy treasures store. Take myself, and I will be ever only all for thee. Giving is our response to what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. Giving signals our recognition of the proper place of money in our lives. Giving is our declaration of faith in Jesus Christ. There may be some among us who think in our hearts as the offering plates are passed, like little Nathan, I want my money back. But I suspect that there are more who are filled with gratitude for what Jesus Christ has done for us, for what God has done for us in the gift of his Son. Let us give of our time, our talents, and our money.